For over 15 years, an unauthorized hiking trail meandered across Danny's private property, a route carved by convenience, not legality, and used almost daily by a group of locals led by a woman named Karen. This trail wasn't an official part of any park system, nor was it maintained by any local government agency. Instead, it was simply a path etched into the landscape through repetition and willful disregard for property boundaries. Karen and her group had grown accustomed to treating the land as public space, often referring to it as the scenic shortcut, unaware, or more accurately, willfully ignorant, of the ecological sensitivity and private ownership of the area. They trampled through. Despite multiple posted signs warning of trespassing and ecological restoration in progress, Karen dismissed them as bluffs or overreactions. To her, Danny was just an inconvenient obstacle in what she viewed as her personal outdoor playground, and she made no effort to hide her contempt for his insistence on preserving what she called just some brush and weeds. What she didn't know or refused to care about was that Danny was not just a property owner. He was a trained restoration ecologist, and this land was not only his home but his life's work. Danny had spent years painstakingly restoring what had once been a degraded parcel of land into a thriving oak savanna, a rare ecosystem that had almost disappeared from the region due to agriculture, urban sprawl, and neglect. His efforts involved removing invasive species, reintroducing native grasses and wildflowers, and working closely with conservation organizations to re-establish habitats for endangered insects, birds, and small mammals. This was not a weekend hobby. It was scientific, meticulous, and deeply rooted in a commitment to environmental preservation. Each plant was chosen for a reason, each soil sample tested, each species catalogued and monitored. It was the kind of work that required years of patience and knowledge. Yet all of this care was being undone day after day by Karen's group, who crushed delicate seedlings underfoot, introduced invasive seeds carried on their shoes and clothing, and scared away nesting birds. When confronted, Karen sneered at the idea that his weeds were worth saving, never considering that what she destroyed in a moment might take decades to restore, if restoration were even possible. Karen's hypocrisy was galling. She wore eco-friendly shirts with slogans like "Respect your Mother Earth," and carried reusable water bottles adorned with stickers about sustainability and conservation. But these symbols were performative. They were fashion statements rather than reflections of true values. Her actions revealed a profound disconnect between image and impact. She mocked Danny's restoration efforts publicly, calling him a weed, whisperer, and tree hugger, while dismissing scientific facts with flippant remarks. She even went so far as to claim that Danny was exaggerating the ecological value of his property just to keep hikers out. As tensions rose, Karen escalated her behavior. She and her group began veering off the worn path deliberately, treating Danny's restoration zones as obstacles to be overcome. When Danny erected a permitted fence to block the trail and protect the most vulnerable areas, Karen retaliated with vandalism, cutting the fence, scattering seeds of known invasive plants, and rallying others in the community to complain that Danny was closing public land, even though it had never been public to begin with. The situation spiraled into a bitter legal and social conflict. Danny documented every incident meticulously. Trail cameras captured the trespassing, plant trampling, and fence destruction. Soil samples showed the spread of invasive species, and eyewitnesses began to speak up about what they'd seen. The turning point came when Danny reached out to a federal biologist through a conservation partnership. A formal ecological survey was conducted, and it confirmed the presence of endangered species on Danny's property, some of which had returned solely because of his restoration efforts. This changed everything. Under the Endangered Species Act, any activity that knowingly harms or destroys the habitat of listed species is a federal offense. Karen's actions, previously dismissed by many as petty trespassing or neighborhood squabbles, were now being examined through the lens of felony environmental crime. The evidence Danny had compiled, particularly the video of Karen tearing down the fence and throwing seeds onto sensitive ground, became central to the case against her. Karen's downfall was swift and dramatic. Confronted with irrefutable evidence and the federal implications of her actions, she could no longer hide behind claims of ignorance or misunderstanding. Prosecutors charged her with multiple felonies related to the destruction of federally protected habitat, and her trial became a cautionary tale about entitlement, eco-hypocrisy, and the power of science-backed legal action. She was convicted, fined heavily, sentenced to probation, and ordered to complete extensive community service, ironically, some of which involved helping with ecological restoration projects. The story reverberated beyond the courtroom. News, coverage, public apologies from former supporters, and community backlash transformed Karen from self-styled environmental hero to cautionary pariah. Some of her former hiking companions began volunteering with Danny, eager to make amends and learn what true conservation entailed. Her downfall marked not only a legal victory for Danny, but a broader cultural shift in the community's understanding of land stewardship and environmental accountability. In the aftermath of the trial, something remarkable happened. The community that had once been sharply divided over the issue began to shift its perspective. Those who had previously sided with Karen, believing Danny to be a bitter landowner, standing in the way of recreational freedom, began to re-evaluate their stance as the full extent of the ecological destruction came to light. Danny's decision to remain transparent throughout the ordeal, sharing documentation of his work, and inviting local schools and conservation groups to observe the restoration process firsthand, played a key role in this transformation. People saw with their own eyes the fragile beauty of the habitat he was protecting: blooming prairie smoke, butterflies that hadn't been seen in the region for decades, birds nesting where there had once been barren soil. Some former critics turned into allies, expressing regret for ever doubting his intentions. A few even asked how they could help, offering volunteer hours and donations to ensure the protection of what was now understood as a biologically significant landscape. The restoration itself began to flourish with renewed support. Freed from constant disturbance and now receiving both public and professional recognition, the oak savanna thrived. The reappearance of rare species, some of which had not been documented in the state for years, brought attention from regional biologists and conservation groups. The site became a living laboratory for ecological study, attracting researchers, students, and volunteers from around the country. Native bees returned in surprising numbers. Ground-nesting birds established regular breeding territories. Even a species of rare orchid, thought to be locally extinct, was spotted in bloom. Local indigenous tribes, who had long maintained a cultural and ecological relationship with oak savannas, honored Danny's efforts by collaborating with him on stewardship practices, sharing traditional knowledge and participating in controlled burns to mimic natural processes. What had once been a battleground of ideology and entitlement had evolved into a space of education, collaboration, and healing for both the land and the people. Ironically, the very person who had caused the most damage began a surprising transformation of her own. Following the court-mandated community service and public scrutiny, Karen was faced with an uncomfortable reality. Her actions had caused real harm, not just to an individual, but to an entire ecosystem. Initially defiant, she softened after spending time on actual restoration projects as part of her sentence. Working alongside botanists and volunteers, she began to understand what Danny had been fighting for all along. In time, that understanding blossomed into something more, a genuine interest in native plant conservation. After completing her probation, Karen enrolled in a master gardening program, eventually earning certifications in sustainable landscaping and ecological horticulture. She began giving talks on the importance of native plants, sometimes using her own story, stripped of self-pity, as a cautionary example of how ignorance and arrogance can destroy what others are working so hard to save. While not everyone accepted her redemption arc, and many remained skeptical of her motives, few could deny that she was making a sincere effort to change. Karen's journey toward accountability, though fraught, underscored a broader theme: that education and exposure can lead to transformation, even among those who once stood in opposition. It also reaffirmed the value of science, patience, and the rule of law in protecting what is fragile and irreplaceable. Danny, for his part, never allowed the controversy to distract him from his mission. He remained focused on the land, working quietly but with purpose, gradually restoring not only the ecosystem, but trust within the community. He continued to publish findings from his restoration work, mentor young ecologists, and advocate for policies that would make it easier for landowners to protect sensitive habitats from recreational abuse. The once contentious property became a local conservation landmark, with walking tours held on designated trails that avoided sensitive areas, routes developed with community input and ecological integrity in mind. Ultimately, the story of Danny, Karen, and the illegal trail stands as a powerful testament to how persistence and principle can triumph over entitlement and ignorance. Justice, in this case, was not served through retribution alone, but through education, transformation, and community reawakening. What began as a battle between a lone conservationist and a trespassing hiking group became a symbol of how one person's dedication to science and the natural world can catalyze broader cultural change. It proved that the law, when wielded in defense of what is right, can be a force not only for punishment but for protection, and perhaps most importantly, it reminded everyone involved that nature is not something to be conquered or casually consumed. It is something to be stewarded, respected, and fiercely defended.